And I think it does go back to fitting in and being liked. And don't get too big for your britches. And look at that girl who's putting herself forth on the playground. I mean, you as a teacher, Shelagh, must have seen this, right? That you would get ostracized if people perceived you to be too much of a peacock.
This is Insight, scaling lessons from the street. In this series, we mastermind a set of topics plaguing women entrepreneurs on a mighty growth path, such as mindset, business modeling, sales, marketing, finance, and legal. Whether you're looking for world domination or to work less while being more profitable, you'll find learnings in here from women who know the journey and fight in the trenches every day. Inside is co-hosted by Andrea Henry, Megan O'Neill, Shelagh Cummins, Susan Diaz, and Wendy Brookhouse.
Hello, everyone. So I am Megan O'Neill. I am a mindset mentor, and I work predominantly with women who are entrepreneurs or business owners. And today I want to talk to you guys about imposter syndrome. So I'm just going to define imposter syndrome because I know that people have heard this imposter syndrome again and again, but I just looked up the definition and it says it's a feeling of inadequacy that persists despite evident success. It's suffer from chronic self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override any feelings of success or external proof of competence. So does that all sound familiar to you ladies?
Sounds like an old friend. Yeah. I think I have her cloak on.
And you know, the reason why I chose this to start off with is because I know that almost every single woman that I have ever worked with struggles with this. And it comes up again and again. And I just wanted to learn from the ladies here what you have experienced. So I just want to put out the question, where have you seen imposter syndrome? Where have you struggled with it?
You mean aside from every single day?
Yeah, particularly in your business, right? That's when it shows its ugly head.
Well, I mean, imposter syndrome is a very tight companion to every move that I make. Being someone who status quo doesn't work very well, I'm always in growth mode. And anytime I do anything of growth, all of a sudden the voices come back up of, who do you think you are? But you don't have an MBA. Why should you be the one to be doing this? And, you know, it's a daily ritual in my world to acknowledge the imposter syndrome and acknowledge the words that it's feeding me and to counterbalance it with something that serves me better. And like, I've been in this for a long time. It's been over a decade and it's still really close. But I think now I have the tools that I can leverage and use to really acknowledge it and move on from it. And sometimes when that fear is standing right in front of your face, to actually make the move anyway. So it's okay to be in action and fearful at the same time. And I think sometimes we fight really hard to keep that fear at bay. Whereas, you know, like right now I'm building out access to capital for women entrepreneurs. I can tell you, investment banking, not my background. Commerce, not my strength. You know, but I'm going to do this anyway because I so believe that it is an important barrier to remove for women entrepreneurs. But that imposter syndrome, she's singing loud right now. So I have upped the ante, if you will, to address her and talk to her.
Yeah. Yeah. And where have you seen it, Shelagh? Has it come out in terms of, I mean, you coach a lot of women. That's who you coach. I do. What do you see in terms of when you're coaching? Where do you see it?
Procrastination, avoidance.
Yeah.
I think women often will play smaller than they really want to because they want to keep it safe. I know in an upcoming episode, we're going to be talking about failure, but they would rather not fail and just not try to get the result than to fail and not supposedly succeed. So I think, you know, where I see it a lot is in the actions and the behaviors that the women present with. And when you get down to the root of it, it tends to always be rooted in worthiness. Am I worthy to be doing this work? Am I worthy of receiving this money? And, you know, which I believe is at the core of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Where else have you ladies seen it? Anyone seen it as their
I can speak to what Sheila speaks of, which is that imposter syndrome is certainly something that has walked beside me for a very long time, and quite recently actually was one of those glaring examples of imposter syndrome. My background is communication, and I've done various forms of communication for over 20 years, and in that background is a good 5 or 6 years of broadcast experience. I was a radio jockey. I've done that for the All India Radio, if you like. However, I didn't want to have my podcast. There's Imposter Syndrome 101. I'm like, what could I possibly have to say? Why would we need one more rubbish podcast in the universe out there? I'm a marketer. I know this stuff doesn't work. You know, this is the kind of voices that speak in my head. It can hold me back, Megan. I'm not going to lie to you. That voice held me back for a good 6 months from putting out a podcast. And when I finally managed to go like, what's going on here? Why am I doing this? It was the fear around it was, quite frankly, the fact that I had an accent as an immigrant. I don't sound like everyone else. And I'm like, in the sound medium, that's not going to translate. Plus, I speak a mile a minute when I'm excited. So I convinced myself this was all not going to work, right? And that's imposter syndrome right there. When I got my stuff in gear and got the podcast out there, it's been the single most powerful marketing move I've made. So that's the power of my little friend, imposter syndrome.
For me, it's been around perfectionism. So always feeling that someone knows more than I do, someone has more experience than I do. Why would people listen to me when they're, lawyers who've been called for 40 years or 50 years or whatever? And it is a constant companion because I am a slightly recovering perfectionist. And so it's very difficult for me to do things that I don't think are absolutely 100% perfect. So for years, for at least 2 years, people have been telling me to do videos, for example. And it took me 2 years to be confident enough to do it, even though I actually enjoy doing it. I enjoy speaking, but I wanted it to be 100% perfect. And I feel like if it's not perfect, it's not good enough. And what has helped me is trying to be evidence-based as opposed to emotions-based. So the emotion is you're not good enough. It's not 100%. Someone's better than you at this. But the evidence is I have clients who love me. I have clients who report that, it has made a difference in their life and in their business. And how I kind of make peace with not being perfect is, well, I'm not perfect, but for that person, the way that I provided the services was perfect for them. And maybe they wouldn't have made the shifts in their business. I wouldn't have had the impact if I was someone else, even if that person, knew more case law than I did. So I really try to bring it back to the evidence when my emotions are trying to tell me that I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting in my industry, only 17% of independent financial advisors are women. I do things vastly different than the average advisor. And the only time I actually feel anything of this nature is when I'm actually in a room full of male advisors. So what I do is I limit that. I limit that a lot in terms of who I talk about, what I'm doing. What's interesting is when any of them care and do the deep dive, they're like, holy cow, this is amazing. I'm so happy to see how you're doing this and want to play. It's just that getting into that point where they're actually open to that or that I even want to have that conversation. Now, how I see it manifest with my clients can be different. And sometimes I call this a little bit of the keeping up with the Jones and things of that nature. But I have had a number of clients sit in my office and say to me, I do not know what the people up the road do, but I'm fairly confident I make more money than them. And yet they can do X, Y, and Z, and I can't. I see it all the time. And so for me, how I try and deal with that is I'm like, first off, I tell them, you don't know what's behind the curtain. That could be just the facade, the thing that they're trying to show the world that's really maybe not truly abundant, even though it may appear that way. And then we work and focus on what are your goals? What's important to you? And how can we help you achieve that? As opposed to trying to set your goals based on what your neighbors do. So I think those are the two things I would share about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
To add to Wendy's point, from a client perspective, perhaps because I work in the digital space and I see so much of like the fact that people just assume visibility is a given, that you can just rock up there and perform and be your best viral self. I certainly see a whole lot of this manifest in our clients, and I think that the way around it that we talk about often is that, and maybe the reason I work in this field, is that nothing in digital is absolute. You can take it down tomorrow, right? I mean, you put something up with your picture on it, you don't like the picture, take it down at 9 p.m. if you put it on at 8 p.m. So I think just embracing that ability to maybe be like, what's the worst that can happen if I challenge the imposter syndrome, is sort of the way I try to get around it and try to, like, I mean, I find myself saying it often to other people because it's easy to preach this stuff, isn't it? It's easy to preach how other people should cope with their imposter syndrome. So sometimes I try to apply that to myself. I'm like, what would I say to a client about visibility? And then I do that.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because I've worked so much with this, I would say predominantly with this, and I see it across every single spectrum. So whether you're in the corporate world, whether you are an entrepreneur, it doesn't matter also how much education. Now, I just think about one woman I worked with, and she had every single Ivy League, you know, sort of letters behind her name, her experience, and yet she was continuing to seek education as a way to validate herself. Not that, I mean, we're always, I think we always want to learn, we always want to go on, but when does that become an excuse, right? Where if I take this course, if I do this, then I will be qualified to do it. So I think it's fascinating. I mean, I believe that it's rooted in our conditioning as young girls. I think all of us are around, you know, a similar age. And I think when we were growing up, we saw our mothers not being recognized for a lot of the work that they did. And maybe that's still the case, you know, monetarily, for sure they weren't recognized. They might have been leaders, but I think this spills into, I just posted this morning a quote from Obama. Obama was in Singapore and he was doing, I'm not sure what he was doing, something around leadership. And he was talking about how he thought women ultimately would make better leaders at this point. And yet we suffer from not having enough female leaders in all industries. And this comes back in my mind to imposter syndrome. We don't want to put ourselves forward as authorities, even though I think the world is begging for us to become leaders. What do you all think?
I absolutely agree. I think for a lot of us, it's scary to position yourself as an authority, because once you are very visible and once you establish yourself as a leader, you open yourself up to criticism. You open yourself up to people not liking you and criticizing you. And I think in our history, it's been important. Women have been able to survive by being amenable and pleasant and bending. And so to step out as a leader and to open yourself up to that criticism, even though intellectually you understand it can't really hurt you, deep within, it feels very scary. It feels very threatening to your very existence. So I think, again, moving past the emotional side of things and understanding, well, what Susan talks about, the worst case scenario. Okay, so if I put this up and someone doesn't like it, someone calls me all kinds of names, really, does that impact my life? Is that going to affect my ability to feed my children? No. Okay. So it's okay, right? Dissecting the fear from what will actually happen, or the worst thing that could happen. Sorry,
yeah.
Megan, I mean, this is such a prevalent, I don't know if you could, I guess you would call it a syndrome that affects women entrepreneurs that are growing your business. We've all talked about it. We've all have episodes of it. We all carry pieces of the syndrome. What can we do about it? What are some well, I know it's not easy, but what are some steps that we can take to move past it?
Well, you know, when I'm working with people, the first thing I always ask people to do is look at their beliefs. I mean, they fuel how you see the world. And I think that a lot of the beliefs that we are still running is exactly what Andrea was talking about. Often childhood beliefs that we inherited, mostly from our mothers and our society, that we need to catch ourselves on. So what is it that makes you feel that you have to be qualified? And I know that when they've done studies that men do not have the same imposter syndrome. They know this as sure as they're sitting there. That, and this is one of the beliefs that I love. I remember seeing, hearing about the study that they did where they created a job. It's like a blue chip company like IBM or something along those lines. And they created this job with these women, this group of women, designed for them. And not one of them applied for the job, but men who did not have the qualifications applied for the job. And when they went back and they said to the women, well, why didn't you apply for this job? They said, well, I just wasn't qualified. I didn't have enough experience. And when they asked the men who weren't qualified, why did you apply for this job? The men said, well, because I could learn it on my feet. And I just don't think we give ourselves enough permission to learn it on our feet and not to not know it all, and that perfectionism. So I think we have to start really looking at what are the beliefs that come up when I'm asked if I want to do something. So say, you know, I'm thinking about women doing presenting and being speakers and presenting their knowledge. And the first thing that they always think of, I find a lot of women that I have talked to, no matter what their background is, no matter what their experience is I don't know enough yet. I'm just not an expert. And they really reject that expert or guru. And it's really loaded, those words. And I think it does go back to fitting in and being liked, and don't get too big for your britches, and look at that girl who's putting herself forth on the playground. I mean, you as a teacher, Sheila, must have seen this, right? That you would get ostracized if people perceived you to be too much of a peacock, right? So I think we have to start really looking at those beliefs. When are you going to be qualified? Well, now, you know, now. So what have you, knowing when imposter syndrome, we're talking about it being a close friend of ours, what have you done to help yourself through the imposter syndrome?
So I don't think it's as close a friend with me, and I don't know if there's something in my mind that just doesn't have a reason to let that out. And maybe it is because my mother imbued with me a sense that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And she was my biggest fan and my biggest everything. So I've been truly blessed to have that upbringing. I probably dealt more with a fear of success than the imposter syndrome. So I had that piece going on. I've always been someone who just kind of, I don't get nerves when I'm playing sports or I'm on stage or anything like that until I'm halfway through. And then maybe my mind catches up with what's going on. So it's more along keeping itself in control about at the halfway mark when you're like, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of the game. Then my nerves hit, you know. So it's an interesting place where that happens. And I think I do have a feeling, I think it's because the answers are everywhere. And I've boiled it down to now being, I don't need to know all the answers. But I sure as heck should know some good questions, and I should know where to go find the answers. Because in my business in particular, and I don't know if it's anyone else's, but well, I would say particularly for you, Susan, the answer changes on a daily basis as to what is the right answer. So why would I memorize all these answers and make sure that I know them? I just need to know, hey, that's a great question, or, oh, these things happen. Here's the question, and here's where I'm going to go find the answer. And I say that to clients all the time. I don't think I have to know everything.
Yeah, and I think a lot of women are fearful of success.
Yeah,
I think that's a big block.
Yeah, I did hypnotherapy, and I did NLP, and I did a whole bunch of stuff. And I think that all that stuff may or may not have helped. I can't be sure, but what I found did work is just doing it. And then all of a sudden, when I'm going through it, and then you realize, oh wow, okay, that worked, and you just keep going. So it was more of a just doing and making myself do the stuff I didn't really want to do.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that's all you can do is just do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Nike.
1 foot. That's true. Yeah. Anyone else?
They're on to something.
They're on to something.
I think from my perspective, I guess it's very tactical, but the way in which I stop myself is to think third person. I find it helps a lot when I take it out of myself in that minute and be like, what would I do if this was somebody else? And I certainly try to channel that part of myself. But in addition to that, I definitely had to do a lot of that deep work into what is it that I believed. And I know that I've had ridiculously silly conversations, Megan, definitely with you, around, oh, I want to be the mom that sits in the park with the fresh cut organic strawberries and feed it to my child when she comes out of school. And then Megan asked me a question about who was going to be making the six-figure salaries while I was doing that. And, so that kind of thing, which is unrealistic stuff, stops me. And in those situations, I find it quite easy to talk myself out of all of that with just being like, would this be a problem for you if this was Shelagh? And then I'll laugh myself out of it.
Yeah. I see it with my daughter who is 13. Or no, sorry, she's 15. I'm losing track of my child's years. But when Sarah was sitting in class with the boys, and this must have been when she was 13 in grade 8, I noticed that she was checking herself on putting up her hand in class. And so I said to her, and the teacher commented on it. And I think this is the beginning of imposter syndrome, by the way. That's why I'm telling this story. But the teacher was saying, this is where Sarah's losing her marks because it was French immersion. And I said, Sarah, what's going on? Why are you not putting up your hand? Why aren't you participating? Because she's kind of an outgoing kid. And she said, because I'm afraid of people laughing at me. The boys are going to be laughing at me. And I think that's what it's always come down to with me, is you're afraid of embarrassing yourself and looking like an idiot. And what I often hear is a lot of women saying, well, I just don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't, and yet their expertise is in this area. So, yeah.
I would say that, I have a pretty, so I'm a very black and white person. I'm very transactional. Everything is a process, a structure. But I have this whole woo-woo side that I've sort of been tapping into in the last 5 years. And for me, visualization for me has been a game changer. And so, visualizing the worst case scenario, like we were talking about before, and understanding how to mitigate it and then understanding how to fix it if it does happen has been huge. But I've also been heavily coached at every step of the way. And even now, as I'm making more pivots and leveraging and scaling myself, I'm still being heavily coached so that I'm not doing it all on my own. And there's someone who can call me out and say, Shelagh, this isn't happening, or you're hiding from this. Come on, let's go make this next step. And someone to hold my hand and walk me through that has also been really valuable. But I also have to say, I have a couple practices which I've noticed the pattern of when I am feeling that imposter syndrome. I'll go and do things like hop on Facebook and go to people who work in a similar space and compare myself to them. And it's like I have to prove to myself that I am not as good or I'm not as worthy. And it's a practice that is very real. And I realized it about a year and a half ago. And it just showed the power of the story that we tell ourselves is the one that is true. And there's always someone who's going to be bigger and better and flashier and better graphics and better marketing. There's always going to be someone. But when I can just focus on me and feed myself the stories of the impact of my business, I go back and read through the testimonials. I look and see where my women are now to when I started working with them. I go and look at the results and I feed myself different data. Mm-hmm. And that directly impacts how I feel in that moment. But I think it's being cognizant of it happening.
Yeah. I did very similar with me. Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm feeling like that, the first thing I do is go look at testimonials to get myself out of that headspace, because it's evidence that what you're feeling is not an accurate representation of what actually is. And that helps to snap it. I just wanted to, when I went to my first degree, I went to an all-girls college. So the university was co-ed, but the college was all girls. And the reason for that was, one of the reasons why they had created all-girls colleges was because in the past, the university didn't admit women. And then they found that women actually do better at all-girls colleges because, and I saw it firsthand, the few times, generally speaking, we would have our tutorials with the other ladies in the college, and everyone was outgoing and raising their hand and challenging the professor. And the few times that, for whatever reason, for scheduling, we had a guy, if it was one single guy in the supervision, these same women who were brilliant and who had all kinds of insights regularly would completely close in on themselves. And so it was just interesting when you were talking about your daughter, seeing that you know, that is continuing. And it's something that, well, when Wendy was talking about really curating the spaces that you're in, one of the things that has helped me in my business and with imposter syndrome and being able to be more authentic is to not go to places where I feel that strongly. So I won't go to places that are very heavy masculine energy, because I will feel out of place. I will feel like an imposter. I will not feel empowered. And so I just don't go. And there may be business that I'm missing out because of it, but I'm perfectly fine with that. I just don't want to have that energy around me. And so just being cognizant of what feeds you, what feeds your sense of pride in yourself, your sense of being able to accomplish and do more of that and less of the things that make you feel less than.
I love that. You know, the one thing that I have done over the years is I have studied people who I think have great mindset. Mm-hmm. So I have, you know, these people who, like, say, for example, I worship Oprah, you know, typical, but I'll study the way that she thinks, or what does she believe, and how does she feel about this? And that often gives me, you know, a guidance for how I want to act. And the one person in the last couple of years is a woman who is a money mindset, actually. Barbara Stanley, and she has this really interesting life that she went through. She was $1 million in debt to the IRS. She had this kind of crazy life, and she had to do a lot of work. She's done a lot of work over the years on herself, but she has adult daughters, I think are all in their 40s, and they'll phone her up and they'll say, "Mom, I'm really afraid to do this. You know, I don't know." And they do the whole mom thing. And she says, "Do what you're afraid of. Do what you fear." And that runs in my mind, and I always think, I got to do this, you know, whether it's physical, if I'm up doing something physical, then I'm like, okay, I got to do this. This is what I fear. So that's really helped me.
Thank you for listening to Insight. If you enjoyed listening, do us a solid and leave us a review. It helps keep us motivated to put our time into producing episodes of value. Thank you.